Hey everybody, it's Pastor Dylan and welcome to the Dayspring Wesleyan Church podcast. At the end of this episode, please take the time to download our church app. It's the best way to stay connected to the life of the church. All you have to do is go to the App Store, search for Church Center, download and enter the information for our church. You will then be connected to our church community. I hope the following presentation inspires you to move closer to God in this journey we call faith. Enjoy.
Good morning, church. So I feel, and I don't know if you, something else going on. Okay. We're getting ready to go again. I don't know if you ever feel this way, but I just feel a little bit out of sorts this morning. We got in late last night. Our son had to run a cross-country meet, and it started at 9:30 at night last night. And so it was called the Celtic Clash. It was in Dublin, which was the coolest thing for me is they play the bagpipes as you start the race. So we didn't get in until after 11, not because my son was slow. It was just a drive back and stuff. So anyways, we had a good time on that. And I was glad that Ohio State won because that means a lot of you come in a better mood than you could be. So I'm glad that took place as well. We're starting our new series today called Emotional Spirituality and Healthy Spirituality. And a lot of you know that we're doing this sort of study at night as well. Today we're going to be looking at 1 Samuel chapter 15, verses 7 through 24. So if you have your Bibles with you, I want you to get those out. Tonight, I want to remind you that in fact is happening, our small group time. I have to tell you, you have impressed me so much with this thing. We were hoping that 100 people would sign up initially. And then it went to 150, and I was like, that's a great number to stop at. And then you decided to go to 200 of you, decided to take this. And so that is just fantastic. So I'm really excited about being part of this journey with you. I think God's going to do some exceptional things in the midst of us. We said the one thing that we wanted to really do this year is grow in our love and our faith and our understanding of God. And I think that this is really going to happen during this time. A couple other announcements I wanted to make you aware of is, first of all, if you're coming tonight, make sure you read chapter 1 of the book because it'll be important to help with the discussion that we're having. The message that we're doing today will be the scripture text for tonight, so that'll help again in your understanding of what's taking place. Don't forget about the meal. There's things for kids and teens. It's possible there could be over 300 people here tonight. So it's with all the kids and the teens things, so it's going to be incredible. If some of you could, especially some of you leaders, if you don't mind parking in the back area, that will help us relieve some of this parking for others that would come. And then also, we have our trunk or treat happening. We still have some signs out there. If some of you want to put those in your yard and kind of announce to the community that we're having. This is one of the coolest ways we have to give back to our community, and we're expecting over 1,000 to come to this event as well. And so we're really excited about that. And that's the week we're taking a break in our study for that. Okay, so that'll be happening that week. And hopefully we're still working on something, but we may have a really cool special speaker coming that morning. I'll let you know more about that if I can get all those contracts worked out. But anyways, over a year ago, what happened to me is I got invited by our district to be part of a leadership study. They were wanting to pour into some of the leaders of the church, and they asked if I would be a part of this. And so we didn't know what we were going to for the meeting. We were just asked to come down to our district center. And so I came there, and then I began to listen to what was basically a sales pitch. And as I was listening to this sales pitch, I was like, oh, they're going to ask us to be a part of this. I don't really want to have anything to do with this. And the reason is our district, most of the stuff they put on has just not been helpful to where I am. And so anyways, I felt like I had to be a good pastor in our district. And when they asked who would be willing to take part of this study, I reluctantly said, yes, I would. And then they had us sign a covenant about showing up and being there and making sure that we are present and some other things. And I have to tell you, again, I signed it, but it was reluctant. And then they asked a question at the end, and the question was this. They simply asked, what's your biggest fear about taking this? And my response was, I'm afraid to waste my time. And that's what that's what I really felt, because I felt like most of the things that we did really waste our time. So anyways, I committed to it, and it was like months later, and we had our first day of the training. And we went into a hotel, I think it was the Hyatt in Columbus. We sat there with a group of pastors, and I was looking around the room, and I was like, I don't know if I have a lot in common with these guys. But they began to start the study. And one of the things they asked us to do right away is they wanted us to do a lot of reflection. So, kind of think about your life, kind of think about your church and your community. And I have to tell you, I have a lot of trouble just sitting in silence. It makes me feel uncomfortable, And some of you may be wired like that. Others of you are like, I love silence. If I could shut my kids up, that would be fantastic, But I just love the noise and just hearing the things around me. I love to people watch, which is scary for some of you. Because if I'm in a restaurant alone, I'm just watching people and I'm kind of giving them their conversation, what I think they're talking about or what they're fighting about and stuff. And I love that. So anyways, that's typically me. So they asked us to do an evaluation of our life. And what they wanted us to do is they wanted us to write all sort of the big moments in our life and then some of the troubling moments, those things that have made us who we are. And so I started to write down these things. And it was interesting because as I began to write things, I began to notice all the sort of the wonderful things that God had done in my life, sort of those favorable moments that have happened. Making the football team, being class or student council president, getting certain grades or getting certain jobs, and all these things were favorable. Convincing Rachel to marry me, having kids, like those were all favorable moments to me. And then I began to list some of the other things. And I won't get into all those, but there are these moments of just complete wreckage in my life. Through circumstances in the family, through letdowns in my own life, to not making something that I wanted to make, not getting a job I wanted to get. And they were just very, very low times in my life. And it was interesting, as I began to evaluate those things, the one thing I noticed is that in all those times of wreckage, it seemed like God would bring me out of that. Well, then they asked us to look at our community and evaluate it. And I have to tell you, I started doing a good thing, and I don't know how many of you have lived in Marion or how long you have, but I remember growing up in Marion. I think we moved here when I was 2 or 3 years old. We moved back to Marion. And what I remember about Marion is I just remember it being a place that I was proud of. I mean, we had a lot of great things here. I mean, it was the power shovel. Like, that was a big thing that we were very proud of. I remember we had, like, Quaker Oats here. We had Whirlpool. We had GTE. Our schools did well in sports, and they did very well in music. And those were all things that I was just proud of. But then as I looked at Marion, I recognized some of the wreckage that took place. We lost the shovel. We lost Quaker Oats. GTE no longer had their presence here. Our schools began to get decimated. Our sports and music didn't do as well as they once did. It wasn't like we had something to be as proud of. I began looking at our mall and remembered all the time I spent there, and now there is just nothing that I would really want to go there for. And I just sort of felt all this wreckage. I mean, we had the stories about Marion, how we're such a poverty area, and we have a big addiction problem there. Remember those? All those stories were coming out. And I have to tell you, even though I was still proud of Marion, I felt the weight of just sort of this wreckage and this downness that you can experience. And then as I thought about it, I thought about what's happening in Marion today. We have a lot of new schools that we didn't once have, so the buildings look fantastic. I mean, even Pleasant looks good, which I didn't think that could ever happen, but it looks nice out there now. We have a big movement to restore Marion downtown, where they're really changing out the buildings and doing some wonderful things there. They're trying to bring in new housing because of intel that's going on. And so there's these moments, again, to be proud of. So as I began to think about that, I was then asked to spend some time with God, spend some time in the scripture, asking God, who has he made me to be? And what is he wanting to do with our church? Well, I turned in the Bible, just a random place, and I thought I would read, and I turned right away to Nehemiah. And if you know the story of Nehemiah, Nehemiah is basically trying to rebuild the wall that has been torn down. And a lot of stuff has been taken away from them, and they're starting to rebuild their community. And the word that God gave me that day was simply this: restore. Restore. And I have to tell you, that hit me with a lot of emotion, because I thought a lot of the things and issues that I had in my life, God took some of those moments of wreckage and he restored relationships. He restored family. He restored jobs. He just restored a lot of things in my life. I began to think about Marion and all the things I listed where God was restoring our sense of community, our sense of pride. And I don't think we're fully there yet, but God just began to give me that word restore. And then as I was thinking about the church, I was thinking, man, as a church, we have the ability to restore. And God flooded me with all these sort of combinations with restore. It was about restoring marriages, restoring families, restoring relationships, restoring respect, restoring those that are addicted, restoring those who are in need, restoring value within people. And then the big thing that came across to me was this, is the idea of restoring hope. And I believe that we have been given this church, and we have been placed in this community with the idea that we can restore hope to people who desperately need it with the love of Jesus Christ. Man, that was so powerful in that moment to me. Because I thought, what has Jesus done in my life to restore hope in my moments of wreckage? And what can God do in our community to restore hope? I believe in the next several weeks, in this study that we're doing, some of you will just listen to it here. Some of you will be coming on Sunday nights. But I believe what God is setting us up to do is to be a place of restoration for a community who desperately needs it. I believe that this is a biblical thing all throughout. Man had a wreckage moment in their relationship with God. And ever since then, God has been trying to restore his relationship with humanity. And he has been trying to restore hope and give people a sense of value and worth. And I'm hoping that over these next several weeks, that's what will begin to be happening to us as you and I will examine ourselves. And you and I will say, well, this is my sort of what God's given me as my purpose in life. And that you would understand that this is the purpose that God has given us as a church as well. As our speaker, who has become a great friend of mine, somebody that I can lean on, someone that's created real value, and somebody that I can talk to, he began to share his own story. And he began to share this story of how he had, grown this church to over a couple thousand, and they had started a school at their church, and God was blessing in all these huge and fantastic ways. But then he said, but I was a wreck on the inside. I was a wreck with my family at home. I was a wreck in relationships with people in the church, because he says it was all about doing and doing and doing. And in that moment, he gave us 3 concepts and 3 circles. And if I had a dry erase board, I would draw them for you. But if you can imagine with me, he said there's basically 3 circles. And the first circle is about knowing. And he says it's about what you know. And he says, I knew who God was and I knew his plan for me. He said, but then there was this 3rd circle. And he said the 3rd circle is about doing. And he said, I was doing everything I could for God. He says, I knew what we had to do. I kept pushing the church forward. I kept pushing my time. And I was spending so much time and energy doing all the right things that I thought I was where I needed to be with the Lord. But he said the thing that I was missing most is the 2nd circle. And the 2nd circle was about being. And he said, Chuck, what I'd failed to do is this. I knew who God was, but I wasn't sitting in his presence. I wasn't allowing him to fill me, so that in filling me, I would do the things that he commanded me to do. And church, I have to tell you, I resonated with that. Because I know God, but I wasn't always sitting in the presence of God. And I was doing things, and they were good things to do. But they were missing something because I wasn't in the presence of God. And there were things that were suffering as a result, whether it be family, relationships, my own personality was suffering in that moment as well. Today we're going to read a story about a man named Saul who was king. It's not by the way, I may do this from time to time, so forgive me, but there's Saul in the New Testament who was Paul. And so you may accidentally hear me say Paul sometimes because I'm messing things up. Two different characters. We're talking about Saul in the Old Testament who was anointed king. Saul had all this grandeur about him. But what was happening is something underneath the surface, something that wasn't very healthy spiritually. You see, I think that when people look at us, I think, and maybe this isn't you, but you may look and say, well, it looks like Pastor Chuck has everything together, and what you're only seeing is you're only seeing the stuff that's on the surface. You don't see what's below the surface. They often use this sort of thing as talking about an iceberg. And an iceberg, you really see about 10% of what's on top, and you don't see what's underneath. And what's underneath can mess us up if we're not careful. That's why it's important for us to take care of those things. So I want to talk today about Saul. And if you would, let's read together in 1 Samuel chapter 7, chapter 15, starting with verse 7 going through 24. It says, Then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. He took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and all the people he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and the cattle, the fat calves and the lambs, everything that was good. They were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak, they totally destroyed. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel, I regret that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Samuel was angry, and he cried out to the Lord all that night. Early in the morning, Samuel got up. He went to Saul, but he was told Saul has gone to Carmel. There he has set up a monument in his own honor and has turned and gone on down to Gilgal. When Samuel reached him, Saul said, The Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's instructions. But Samuel said, What is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this lowing of cattle that I hear? Saul answered, The soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and the cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God. But we totally destroyed the rest. Enough, Samuel said to Saul. Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night. Tell me, Saul replied. Samuel said, Although you were once small in your eyes, did you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and he sent you on a mission, saying, Go and completely destroy those wicked people. The Amalekites wage war against them until you have wiped them out. Why did you not obey the Lord? Why did you pounce on the plunder and do evil in the eyes of the Lord? But I did obey the Lord, Saul said. I went on the mission the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites, and I brought back Agag, their king. The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God in Gilgal. But Samuel replied, Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. I violated the Lord's command in your instructions. I was afraid of the men, and so I gave in to them. Let's pray together. Father, I want to thank you for this moment when we can pause and we can reflect upon your word. And though this story is interesting and it happened so long ago, there are still truths that apply to us today. Help us to be able to examine our own motives and our own thoughts, and help us to recognize the need for you in our life. I pray today, Father, again, if there's anything that I would say that is incorrect, may you clean it up in the ears of your people so that the only voice today that they hear from is you. In your name we pray. Amen. So first question is this: what motivates you? I mean, if you and I sat around all day and we began to talk about the things that really motivate us, what motivates you? For some of you, it would probably be, well, my spouse motivates me, because if I don't do the things that they ask, they're going to get on me. Some of you would say, well, it's my love for my children that motivates me. It would be others of you, it would be work or your environment. But what motivates you? And where is God in that whole picture? In 1 Samuel there, 15, 1 through 3, Saul was given a command, and it's simply this. It says, Samuel said to Saul, I am the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they weighed them as they came up from Egypt. Now go, attack the Amalekites until they destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. Now, I have to tell you, reading that first thing that's pretty intense, right? He's saying, I want you to destroy everything. And in our world today, we would say, man, it's a risky command right there. You're going to go destroy everything, especially when it starts talking about infants and it's talking about all the livestock and all of that. And you have to understand right away what this is. This is God's command to Saul, and it's to completely destroy everything. Now, I have to tell you, there have been moments that I've sat in the presence of God where God has simply said, Chuck, I want you to give this thing up. And it's a moment of destruction for me. It's these moments that says, Chuck, I think that this is too tempting for you, so I want you to give this up. There are some things that I've been very proud of, some groups that I've been very connected with where God says, this is taking your time from your family, this is taking your time from the church, and I need you to give that up. And everything within me wants to hold on to it. But the Lord is saying, Chuck, listen, I need you to destroy this very thing. And there are things in your life that God will ask you to destroy or give up. There may be friendships that are very tempting for you. There may be places that you go that may cause you to sin. And God may say to you, I need you to give this up. But when it comes to destruction, you're not like, well, is there just part of it I can give up? I don't want to give up the whole thing. And for some reason, we want to stay connected to this. What you need to understand, first of all, about what God was asking Saul to do is saying, I want you to destroy the Amalekites. And one of the reasons is they were known as a guerrilla group. And what I mean by that is they continuously attacked the Israelites. They would have these moments of peace, but then they would come and attack them and come and take stuff from them. And they would come and take their men and their women. And they were full of idolatry, which is worshiping those idols that had been carved out. And God said, I can't have any more of that. There were so many practices that were going to the Amalekites that were sinful in nature, so many sexual things that were happening, that diseases were running rampant within the people, within the animals, within the children. They were training this group to continue to attack Israel over and over and over again. And so when God was asking them to destroy them, it was for a purpose, and it was for a reason. And when God asks you and me to destroy something in our life, it's because he knows that the devil will use that over and over and over again to attack us in our moments of weakness. The reason why God had this command was for simply this. He wanted to protect Israel. This was his way of protecting Israel. He was saying, if we can get rid of all this stuff, this will in fact help you. And think about that. If a group keeps attacking you over and over again, if they're completely wiped out, then you don't have to worry about them coming against you anymore. You don't have to worry about their idols coming into your culture. You don't have to worry about them taking your women. You don't have to worry about the diseases that were spread over time. You don't have to worry about this anymore because they have been completely wiped out. And when God gives you a command to take up something and to get rid of it in your life, he is doing it for your benefit, for your protection, for your well-being. And you simply have to ask yourself, do I fully trust God to do this? Saul knew what God had commanded, but Saul had a little bit of conflict. And so when we get into verses 7 and 9, we have this purpose that Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way to Havilah, to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. He took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive and all his people, and he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and the cattle, the fat calves and the lambs. They were saving all this stuff for themselves. They didn't get rid of the king, which you would think, was there a purpose or a reason? Think about this. Him leaving the king alive allowed that king to still have a voice. And I don't know if you've ever seen some of these sort of trials that went on after World War II. Or if you've seen these trials of Saddam, but it gave them a voice to speak and to continue to share their lies over and over again to work up their people. And it would give Agag a voice to continue to stir other nations up as well against Israel. But the conflict from Saul was simply this. I think there was this moment that he really wanted to please God. And I think for all of us, there's moments when we want to please God. We want to do what's right in his sight. Like, some of us will come to church, we'll sing the songs, we'll put the Christian music on, we'll have our daily devotions, and we'll spend those moments with God, just loving God, listening to God, and sort of feeling his presence in our life. But then there's that part of the world as well that we come into conflict with. Because in our own abilities, there's also this wanting to please man as well. And pleasing God and pleasing man can often come in conflict with one another. And we're living in that world today. We're living in that world where we as Christians don't want to be seen as sort of these crazy people, these very intolerant people. And so there's so much of the world that we want to hold on to. And the Lord says, why are you holding on to that thing? You know what I've asked. You know what I've commanded. Why are you holding on to that thing? And I think there's this conflict within us to say, yeah, but there's a moment I want to please God, and there's a moment I want to please man. And I think we can find that in all areas of our life. Because I know that there's moments when I want to please God, but there's also moments that I want to please my kids. And for me, that word of conflict comes in sort of their activities, their sports and their music. Because I want them to do well in sports, and I want them to do well in music. But the conflict comes in, at the end of the day, I know that they need to know God. Because God matters for eternity. But I want them to fit into this world so much. And I want them to have this life that's full of joy. And I think there can be a balance there. But my problem is, when I give more into the world than I give into God, that's a conflict that we need to wrestle with and understand that God has got to be more important than this other stuff. And that conflict for me crashed in the last month or two. And I realized that all my time and energy at home was spent on making sure that they do well in sports, making sure they do well in school, making sure they do well in music. But I wasn't making sure that they did well with God. And so Rachel and I had a discussion. We said we need to make sure that we're starting to do devotions with our kids. So there's a couple kids every night that we meet with and have devotions with. And we still got to work on with the other kids as well. Why? Because we want them to know that God is more important than any of this other stuff. And I don't know where that conflict is for you, but I know that at times it exists. And for Saul, it existed. And Saul didn't do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. It's interesting, by the way, if you hear what Saul says every time and his response to Samuel, he says, we did it for your God. Do you notice that? He never did it for his God. God was never personally his. And church, I have to ask that question, is God personally yours? Or is this just the God that Chuck talks about? Or is this just the God that Dayspring talks about? Is he your God personally? So there's an intervention in Saul's life because I believe that they still care about what's going on. It says, the word of the Lord came to Samuel, I regret I have made Saul king because he turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Samuel was angry and cried out to the Lord all night. You see, what happens in this moment is God begins to regret his decision to make Saul king. You see, the people had cried out for a long time, we want a king just like everybody else. Why? Because they wanted to fit in with the world. And God says, okay, you want a king? I'll get you a king. And so he calls Saul, who doesn't feel like he's up to the task. But all of a sudden, it seems like Saul kind of gets his legs underneath him to the fact that it says that he builds a monument in his own honor. And God looks at Saul and says, I regret making you because you are not following my commands. You no longer have a listening ear. You're not even calling me your God. And I think that there's times when you and I sort of can regret some of our own decisions. We can regret things or money that we may have spent on that didn't go our way. I mean, we bought new windows for our house, I don't know how many years ago. But we purchased these windows and had them installed, and we were wanting to save money on our house. And it saved no money because when they installed them, there was like this much gap around the window where we could literally see through, and had to have it worked on time and time again. And it felt like it was constant. It was a big headache. And there was a moment of regret, like, why did we put all this money into something that doesn't work at the end of the day? And God is looking at Saul and says, why have I invested my time in you? And begins to regret that. And I often pray to myself, Lord, I hope I never come to the place where you regret calling me into this ministry or into this work. And I hope that you never regret the time that God has called you to your family. But I also know that all of us live with regrets. We live with mistakes. But I'm so thankful, by the way, for a gracious God who works in spite of all my mistakes. Aren't you? I'm thankful for a loving, graceful God who says, yeah, Chuck, you're an idiot sometimes. But that's the kind of people I can use. I'm like, okay, Lord. Thank you. I'm so thankful for that. Samuel, where he basically intercedes on behalf of Saul. He's very angry and he begins to cry out to the Lord over and over and over again. And he begins, I believe, to pray for Saul that he would begin to see the light, that when he talks to him, he'll understand. And again, I think a lot of us can understand. I think that many of us have interceded for either a child or a family member. Maybe we've interceded for somebody in the church. And we thought, Lord, I just hope that as I talk to them that they'll get it. I hope that they'll turn away from their addictions. I hope they'll get their marriage together. I hope that they'll bring their kids to church. I hope they'll allow me to invest some time into them, and we intercede constantly on their behalf. But then there comes that moment of confrontation. And so in verse 12 it says, earlier in the morning, Samuel got up and went to meet Saul. But he was told Saul had gone to Carmel. Then he set up a monument in his own honor and has turned and gone on down to Gilgal. I bet Samuel was hot about that. I'm here to confront you and you're already building a monument in your own honor. You got to be kidding me. Come on, Saul. I'm praying for you all night that you would change and that you would listen. And so Samuel confronts Saul. And he tells him all the things that he did wrong. And I thought about this myself. How do I respond to confrontation? How do I respond when somebody has prayerfully come to me and said, Chuck, I want you to take a look at this. Am I willing to take a deep look, or am I already building my case to say, well, you don't understand me, or this is where I was right and you're wrong, and are we doing that? Like, how do we respond? How do we respond when God gets a hold of me and says, Chuck, I don't think you should have responded that way. Do I shut him out, or am I willing to listen? Samuel is going in, pleading and begging on behalf of Saul with God and wants to confront him. But Saul's response is this in verses 13 through 19. It says, when Samuel reached him, Saul said, the Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's instructions. I think that Saul probably already gets an idea that Samuel is a little bit ticked. And Saul already says, I did everything that the Lord commanded me to. It says, but Samuel said, what then is the bleating of sheep in my ears? What is the lowing of cattle I hear? Saul answered, the soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and the cattle to sacrifice to the Lord. See how we tried to spiritualize that? And I think too oftentimes we try to spiritualize things in our own life. I know I have. I wrote off a lot of the moments that I wasn't spending with my family because I was doing the Lord's work. I was doing the Lord's work. So therefore, I can give up that time. And the truth is, I can't. That time is just as important because that is where God has placed me. And I need to be there for my family. So they continue to have this discussion, and Samuel says, enough. But I want you to watch what he first does, because his first response is there. He just lies. Saul just lies. He just says, I did everything the Lord commanded. Did he do everything the Lord commanded? No. He lied. He said, but I did obey the Lord. Saul said, I went on the mission of the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag, their king. It's crazy because he says, I completely destroyed all the Amalekites. But then he says, but I saved one. So did he completely destroy? No, he lied. He says the soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God in order to sacrifice. They weren't planning on sacrificing that, by the way. They just threw that in. And he's lying to a God who knows everything. Isn't it amazing how much we lie to ourselves sometimes? I mean, we tell these little white lies all the time. And God knows. He knows the intent of our heart. We tell little lies in our relationships all the times. We tell ourselves that, we're not really flirting with this other person at work. We lie to our spouses. And we tell them that we'll be at something, but then we're not really present in the moment. We tell little lies like that all the time, don't we? We tell the boss we got something done when we know we haven't really completed the task he's asked us to do. And we tell ourselves lies. And if we tell these lies long enough, we begin to believe them. And God says, I just want you to be honest. I just want you to be honest. And some of you have been around people that have told you lie after lie after lie. If you've ever been around somebody with addictions, they tell a lie long enough that they believe it's truth. And you just sit there and why do you keep lying to me? And you get frustrated. And God gets frustrated when we keep lying to him. We just need to be honest with God, because he already knows. In the end of that, it's funny because in verse 21, he says the soldiers took the sheep. You know what Saul is basically saying? He doesn't take responsibility for any of it. Who's in charge? Saul. I mean, if you know anything about a king, when the king says something, it happens. Those guys aren't doing anything without the king's approval. And what does he do? He tries to blame it on somebody else. And we often pass the responsibility on as well. Even in the ministry, I can pass on the responsibility. Again, well, I'm doing things for the Lord, and if so-and-so wouldn't have died, I wouldn't have had to be away, or if so-and-so wouldn't have called me and asked for some counseling, then I wouldn't have had to be there, and I'm not taking responsibility. Because there are moments in life when I can say to somebody, hey, is it okay if we meet a little bit later? Because tonight I need to be with my family. We don't take responsibility for our own actions. I mean, I'm around that all the time. I mean, if you've been around kids, you're going to be around that all the time, right? Well, the reason I didn't get this done, and you're like, are you kidding me? Just take some responsibility. Well, so-and-so does it. I don't care what so-and-so does. Just take responsibility. And church, I think that you and I need to take responsibility. I think as a church we need to take responsibility. There have been numerous mistakes that the church has made over years where we have hurt and offended people for the wrong reasons. And as a church, we need to take responsibility and say, we can't be that way anymore. We've had people come into the church, and just because of the way they look, just because of the way they dress, just because of some of the things that they say out of their mouth, we hold them at arm's length. And when God says, I just want you to love people. And we have to take responsibility for that. I have to take responsibility for my own prejudices and say, I'm going to love people no matter what race, no matter what their ethnicity is, no matter what their background is, no matter how they vote. I'm going to love each and every single person that comes through that door. Church, we have got to take responsibility as well. So after all this takes place, in verses 22 through 24, Saul admits God is not what motivates him. Listen to this. But Samuel replied, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as is obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. I have violated the Lord's command and instruction. I was afraid of men, so I gave in to them. And Samuel said, because you did this, the Lord will no longer be with you. You see, the problem with Saul is that even at the end of it, he really wasn't willing to take responsibility and change. Matter of fact, we read later that he calls upon spirits and other things to try to establish his kingdom. He's turning to all the wrong things and completely getting away from God. So that's what God allowed him to do. Question is this: are you willing to submit to God? You know, next week we're going to talk about another guy who comes in the story. His name is David. Some of you may know this, some of you won't. David becomes king after Saul. David began to do all the right things, but guess what? There comes a moment in David's life when he commits a major sin of adultery. And just like Saul, David is confronted. A prophet of the Lord comes to him and basically says, David, you have sinned against God. I want you to notice David's response. David's response was to admit his sin immediately and to say that every punishment that has been declared by the Lord, I know it has to happen. And then later we read, he has this prayer that says, search me, O God, know my heart. If you continue to find anything wrong within me, let me know about it. Let me ask you, during this study, are you willing to look deep within? And are you willing to have that moment where you say, God, search me. And if there's anything that you find wrong, I want you to confront me with it. And then will you allow yourself to step into that and ask for forgiveness and move in a way that changes you to where you know that you are in the very presence of God and you are saying, Lord, whatever you ask, I'll do. Would you stand with me this morning, church? I want you to just close your eyes for a moment, and I want to ask you this question. Over the next several weeks, through the study or through the times on Sunday morning, if you're willing this morning to say, Lord, whatever you confront me with, I want to listen, and I want to ask for forgiveness, and I want to move forward with you. If that's you today, would you just please raise your hand, and I want to pray for you. Father, so many hands lifted up today, including mine. I pray that through this study over the next several weeks, that we would be a people that would listen intently to you, to walk into your presence, to know that you are calling us as individuals to do something corporately together, the likes of which the world has never seen. Allow us to be able to step into our own failures and begin to recognize a God who graciously understands, loves us, and wants to move us forward. You say we don't have to sit in that anymore, but you'll change us from the inside out. And so, Father, help us to deal with what's underneath the surface. So what's underneath the surface will allow us to be better above surface and to affect our community, our families, our relationships, our work, our community in real and special ways. Father, thank you for meeting with us now. In your name we pray. Amen. Hey, church, thanks for being here with us. Some of you will see tonight. Others will see next week. Thanks.
Once again, thanks for listening. If you are in the Marion area, we would love to engage with you at one of our Sunday morning gatherings. For directions, service times, and information about our fantastic children and student ministries, visit us at dayspringwesleyan.org. That's dayspringwesleyan.org.